Well, Elon Musk isn't slowing down when it comes to tackling Washington's bloated federal agencies. After dealing USAID a death blow, the billionaire has now turned his attention to Radio Free Europe and Voice of America. A waste of hard-earned cash, he says.
It's just radical left crazy people talking to themselves while torching $1 billion a year of U.S. taxpayer money.
Well, this comes amid, of course, Trump's dismantlement of USAID, accusing it of corruption, even criminality. The agency, now exposed as little more than a front for the CIA, holds the purse strings for 60% of America's total foreign assistance, dishing out $40 billion last year alone. And now the U.S. State Department will take over what's left of it, with Trump announcing that only 300 of its current 14,000 employees are not in the firing line. Well, a former U.S. State Department official has been key in exposing some of USAID's most controversial activities. Mike Pence sat down with journalist Tucker Carlson, detailing a number of times when the agency fomented chaos and even toppled governments. Here he highlights events in Bangladesh last summer.
Basically, there was a conflict around the construction of a U.S. military base in the region, which is a very common conflict that we have. Oftentimes, foreign countries don't like having a big, fat U.S. military base installed, on...
They don't want foreign troops on their soil.
Let's just say it really is vital to U.S. national interests to build that military base in Bangladesh to counter Chinese influence, and the Bangladeshi prime minister doesn't want to do it. And so our foreign policy planners decide we need to do regime change.
The allegations about USAID just keep on coming. A few months ago, when protests engulfed Bangladesh, forcing the PM to flee for her life, she said the US was behind them.
I could have remained in power if I had surrendered the sovereignty of St. Martin Island and allowed America to hold sway over the Bay of Bengal.
The US, she said, wanted to build a military base on St. Martin Island to counter Chinese influence, echoing what we just heard there from a former US State Department official. At the time, Washington said the claims were laughable.
The former Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina accused the United States of orchestrating mass protests that led to her ouster after weeks of violence. Do you have any comment on that?
That's laughable. Any implication that the United States was involved in Sheikh Hasina's resignation is absolutely false.
But now, a former State Department official has exposed how plans to remove Sheikh Hasina from power had been in the works since 2018. Mike Pence says USAID was instructed to spend money on projects that would prop up opposition groups and exploit issues to destabilize the country.
And they noted, that rap music was popular and young people were listening to rap music in Bangladesh. So what do? They turned around and they took U.S. taxpayer funds. They get 100% of their money from the State Department, and they work closely with USAID. They actually administer USAID programs all over Bangladesh and all over the world. And they funded Bangladeshi rap groups to produce songs and music videos insinuating that people should take to the streets and do street protests and, the classic peaceful protest that has the upside of being a riot.
Violent protests spread in Bangladesh with some 1,500 people killed. What happened after Sheikh Hasina fled? An unelected US-friendly stooge was handed the keys to rule. And fresh elections? Voters may have to wait until 2026 while reforms are implemented. Mike Pence went on to make even more explosive allegations about USAID's role in trying to overthrow the Cuban government, this time through social media.
And so they sought to do that in Cuba by creating what USAID called a Cuban Spring. And the problem was at that time, Cuba had banned U.S. social media companies, calling them, a tool of U.S. imperialism. And so there was no Twitter allowed. And so USAID pulled off this operation to create a company called Zunzania, which it was a Twitter knockoff.
Yes, Zunzania, which wasn't really about letting people post their news online. USAID was using the platform to map out which users could be susceptible to helping bring down Havana.
They would switch the algorithms, and they would selectively target news distribution of messages to users on the basis of their political proclivities, in order to get them to take to the streets in violent street protests and overthrow their government. Basically the same, pull off the same thing that happened in the Arab Spring, but do it in Cuba.
Medal, medal, medal. While USAID was desperately trying to cover its tracks using offshore accounts and front companies to hide its involvement, it was eventually exposed.
There will be absolutely no mention of United States government involvement. This is absolutely crucial for the long-term success of the service and to ensure the success of the mission.
Yet despite being questioned at the time about whether the agency was transparent about how it engaged with civil society in other countries, it consistently lied.
We support civil society. We support and implement the FY14 appropriations language that directs us to improve access to information and internet freedom in many parts of the world. We do it transparently and with public notifications. The fact that we're discussing it in this briefing highlights the reality that these are publicly notified programs.
What are some other countries where you do it openly?
There's literally around the world. And we've had efforts in Kenya to support the Yes Youth
Have they always been done with full
groups.
Has it always been done with full knowledge and support of our U.S. ambassadors in those countries in every instance?
That's the aspiration.
Mike Benz accuses USAID of also being implicitly involved in trying to cook up corruption stories about officials it wanted to bring down, using friendly or naive journalists to do its dirty work.
And so what did they do in 2019? They dug up dirt on Rudy Giuliani, and then that dirt ended up being used as part of the impeachment of Donald Trump in 2019. In that case, if there was no State Department USAID funding to OCCRP, they wouldn't have presumably had the capital to go out and dig up dirt on Rudy Giuliani. And so USAID spending to journalists in Ukraine comes back to be used to impeach Trump.
Well, and to smear me as a Russian agent.
Right.
That's been reported. It's out there. It's proven. So my tax dollars go to impugning my character and calling me a disloyal American.
What USAID has been doing for decades is sowing dissent, pushing U.S. foreign policy, and for years trying to fly under the radar. It's been doing it covertly, often using other organizations to control the narrative or freeze out funding for organizations that it doesn't like. One of the ways it does this is through Internews, working in 100+ countries with 3,000 media outlets and 20,000 journalists on its payroll. Its president even champions how it tries to shift money away from what it deems bad content.
Disinformation makes money, and that's one of the, we need to follow that money, and we need to work with in particularly the global advertising industry, that a lot of those dollars go to pretty bad content. And so you can work really hard on exclusion lists or inclusion lists to sort of really try to focus ad dollars and challenge the global advertising industry all around the world to focus their ad dollars towards the good news and information, the accurate and relevant news and information.
WikiLeaks reports Internews was paid nearly $500 million by USAID to carry out its work that promoted the political interests of the US. And that's not just an allegation. One former VP at Internews raised her own concerns.
The first phase of Internews was really a lot of fun. We'd come up with little bits of money and do things, all pretty ad hoc. But then the organization began structuring itself around getting money from the government. There was now an intersection between the political interest of the U.S. and the work we were doing.
And it's that intersection of how U.S. political interest was pushed across the world through its so-called humanitarian programs that's now being exposed. A can of worms opened with the lies, manipulation and meddling of an agency all wriggling out. And it's ugly.